My name is Kat Huang. I am a teaching artist here at Art Prof, and I'm joined today by Professor Lieu and fellow teaching artist Jordan McCracken-Foster. Today, we are talking about our favorite art projects. If you want to nerd out about art, Art Prof has everything you need, from tutorials to critiques to a community of fellow art nerds. One of the most defining factors for my favorite art projects are ones where I have crits, and after the critiques, I will go back to the piece and think like, I want to keep exploring more about this piece. So I'm curious, Jordan, if you have any determining factors as to what makes your favorite projects.
Honestly, a lot of my favorite projects just go back to, did I have a good time creating it? I find that a lot of times when people don't enjoy their work, that becomes so much more difficult for them to look back later on and say, oh, that was a good time. So that is one key factor. Whether it comes out good or not is almost besides the point. So that's usually the biggest one for me.
That's true. I guess it's hard to call something your favorite when you don't feel good about something. What about you, Clara? Do you have any defining factors for your favorite projects?
I mean, I think I would say favorite in quotes because they're my favorites, not because they're my favorite images, but because they were the most impactful, because I learned a lot from them. Because the two projects I'm going to show today in this stream, I don't really like them that much as artworks. They're okay, but I feel like the takeaway was so big from that experience that matters to me the most. And we're going to show you guys a broad range of projects. In fact, we're going to start with Jordan, and we're going to show you guys the work he was doing when he was 15. So Jordan, can you walk us through some of the stuff you were doing and why this was impactful to you?
Yeah, and before I answer that question, I want to bring up Neil's question. Will this be about projects you did in art school or personal projects? And you'll find with at least me that it's both. So this is going to be a personal project that I'm talking about, and then Kat and Clara are going to have their own little inputs. So for me, what I did when I was about 15 years old, I found a YouTube channel and there was this guy who went and taught you how to draw your favorite characters. And so I would take the techniques that he was doing and apply them to my own drawings. And so, as you guys may well know, one of my favorite shows is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so I think I was 16 when I did this drawing. I drew Aang, and I learned about the line of action and using different colors to start off the drawing, and then almost inking with like a black or traditional pencil. And I just tried to really build up my skill this way because I just really wanted to do it. And it wasn't something I was doing in school. In school, I was doing traditional studio art, do the still lives and, draw the model doing this. I'm like, I want to draw cartoons for once. And no one told me to do this. No one asked me to do this. I just wanted to have a lot of fun.
Tell us in the chat, you guys, how many of you at some point have made fan art? Because I know that you've heard us say in a lot of these art school portfolio videos that, oh, you guys should not be putting fan art in your art school portfolios. And so sometimes that comes across as a message that says fan art is bad, but it's not. It gets a lot of people jump-started. Like, Kat, didn't you do fan art when you were a kid?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. My fan art is pretty similar with Jordan's, where I would have an image of my favorite series and I would copy the drawings. Like, I was so obsessed with American Dragon Jake Long when I was little. I think I might have had a crush on Jake the dragon, but he's also a boy. He's a boy. But I definitely did drawings like that.
And Jordan, this piece, the one on the right, you guys, Jordan did this when he was 12. Can you tell us the story behind it, Jordan?
Yeah, so I was in New York and I was with my mom. I was visiting her for the summer, and there was this big birthday party. And it was for my cousin who was turning 5 years old. His name is Noah. And we were like, and my mom said, Jordan, you should do a cool drawing for him. I said, okay, what does he like? She did the research and found out he likes Spider-Man. And I like Spider-Man, as many of you guys know. So I looked at a comic that I had of him and I just drew this Spider-Man. The sad thing is, I don't know if I actually ever gave it to him. I showed it to him. He thought it was cool, but then he went off to play and I went to do my own thing. And I honestly don't know if he even has this. So, but I do have the photo. So, yeah.
And by the way, Jordan and I have a movie art critique on Peter Parker's costume designs for his Spider-Man costume. Of course, we all know how it came out, but Tobey Maguire needed a little help in his brainstorming process. So Jordan and I gave him a couple tips in this video.
We have this comment from Natalie, and says, I find I get overwhelmed with all the decision making when starting a new project. There are so many options that I find I get lost with all the decisions before I start. How do you guys start? So, Kat, do you want to take the question?
I think that's a really good question. I think that's a very common problem, so it's good that somebody's brought it up. I'll just say my method of trying to conquer this fear is that I try to find the one hook into a project. For instance, I think I've already explained this before in a previous stream, but I had a comic named Mama Bruja. It's a very complicated plot, and it's about a Mexican-American family of which I do not identify with. So I had to try to find that hook that led me into that project and then made me brave enough to explore further aspects of that project. So my hook into this story was the swimming pool of the setting. And it can just be totally random. I never thought I would be hooked into a story just because I was really thinking about the design of the swimming pool of their house. But you'd be surprised. And I think the ways you can find this hook is just by doing research. And you might get overwhelmed, but really finding something that will interest you into exploring more is my method of conquering this fear.
I would say also, it does not hurt to let yourself barf on the page. Just get a blank sheet of paper and just say, okay, this is the idea, and just throw everything down on paper. Because my big thing about starting projects is a lot of people try to brainstorm in their head. And I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should just take a pen, just start writing, and you're going to end up with pages and pages of just whatever. But out of that whatever, you might have one idea that has potential. So I think a lot of it is just, you got to keep your hand moving. Don't just sit there and think. That is not going to work out so well. So I would consider that. And Jordan, we know that the fan art eventually turned into this lifelong career with character design. And Kat and Jordan have these two streams that talk about character design that I think you guys might really enjoy. Kat, you are up next. Can you tell us when you did this series of charcoal drawings?
I did this series when I was a freshman in art school, pretty fresh, new art student. And the assignment was to do a 50 drawing series of something. And the something that I chose was hands. So I did 50 drawings of hands. And ultimately, after I finished this series and looked back on it, I thought, hey, it's not bad. It's pretty good. There are some pretty good drawings in there. And also my figure drawings got way better after doing all these hand studies because I started to get a feel for the charcoal. I used charcoal powder and I used a foam brush. So the more I did, the more I understood about the medium. But I will say that this series, although it had its perks that I could recognize later on, I did not feel good about the environment surrounding this project because I just felt I wasn't supported while making this series. I think the professor and I were at odds all the time because I just don't think we meshed as people. I don't think it's their fault, but because of that professor's instructions, I had no idea what I needed to improve on. The only thing I had to keep me going was to just keep drawing, which in itself is a valuable lesson. But I would have really appreciated some solid points to latch onto to know what I was doing right and what I could improve on. I don't know if you've ever had this sort of dynamic between a student-teacher dynamic, Clara. Have you?
Well, I certainly have students complain a lot where they say, I have no idea what this professor wants me to do. It's okay to have a healthy dose of that, but I have seen projects that are so vague that I look at it, I go, I don't know what to do here, because as a student, you want to feel that you're fulfilling expectations. But Jordan, what do you do when you can't fulfill those expectations? It's really frustrating, right?
Oh, it's incredibly frustrating. And I think that I think it's really tough when you can't connect with the teacher on this because you're looking for guidance and you're trying to learn all this stuff. But if you're not clicking, there's not a whole lot you can do. We actually have this question for Clara, and it says, did old masters ever do fan art of other artists?
I'm sure they did. I mean, if you guys go back into art history, you'll see a lot of pieces where it's an engraving after a Pontormo painting. That was very common actually in the Renaissance, where they would have an oil painting and then they would hire an engraver to create a printed version of that. So, you know, they weren't drawing Sonic the Hedgehog, but I'm sure they had their version of that. Well, Kat, I'm really glad you brought up not just the project we're looking at here, but also the environment is so important. Like, Jordan, when you were doing fan art, how did that feel? What type of environment was that?
Oh, it was fun. I usually had a computer just like showing the artwork, and I would either listen to music or I'd be watching the actual show or movie of whatever I was drawing. And I just had fun. That was the whole point for me, was to just figure out how to have the most fun while drawing and just do it. Because some of the assignments I got, while necessary, while important, were a bit boring. And so, yeah, I really wanted to just make sure I had fun doing that process and just let my mind go, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And Kat, this toxic environment, it wasn't just the professor. I think you had mentioned you had trouble with some of your classmates as well.
Right. I do want to say that most of my classmates were great. And they did give me great advice and critique and were wonderful people. But I also happened to have a toxic relationship within that classroom with someone else. And this person happened to be doing really well in the class, but would never help me, even though it was clear I was struggling. In fact, I actually caught this person going behind my back and telling other people, I think Kat's struggling in this class. And I thought, great, so you see that I'm struggling, but you're not going to help me, huh? But ultimately, I think what I learned from this is that even though you do need people of different mindsets to look at your art and give you feedback, not all the time, it is not a good thing all the time. Some people really aren't good fits for talking about your work, and it's good to recognize that. After this art project, I think it really made me realize that I have to really pay attention to the people who are around me and who are critiquing my work. And if they're there to actually help and uplift me, or if they're actually trying to put me down.
And that's really good advice for your whole life. It doesn't matter if you're in art school or not.
We have this question from Neil. It says, I'm working on multiple pieces right now and I feel really scatterbrained. Is this normal? Clara, what do you think?
Yeah, of course it is. You're working on multiple pieces. But you know something, Neil, the way I would look at it is that the advantage of working on multiple pieces is that you will not be remotely as fussy on each piece if you say we're only working on one piece for 6 months. One of the reasons I like to work on multiple pieces is when I get frustrated with one piece, I can take a break and go work on something else. And another good thing too is sometimes those artworks, they grow together. And so you see the differences between them and can really measure the process in that way. I mean, that's inevitable that you're going to feel scatterbrained, but just try to see past that and think about what are some of the opportunities. By the way, if you guys want to draw a bunch of hands, I got you covered, because this last weekend I got to do this anatomy lecture on drawing hands. So if you guys want to watch this video over and over and over again, I would. If I wasn't in it, I totally would. But then again, I can just watch Jane Eyre. That takes care of me. But we also have this Art Prof reference photo collection. The link is in the video description below. And we have tons and tons of reference images to help you guys practice drawing hands. Okay, now this next project is mine, and it was not done in art school. I actually did it, I think, 3 years after I had graduated, and I was in a rough patch. I mean, Jordan, what's it like right after school? It's weird. That transition you make from graduating into the real world is odd, isn't it?
Oh, it's so weird. And I'm still, getting used to the idea of not having to wake up and go to class. And I feel like the transition was a little easier because COVID happened like midway through. And so, I still got to stay at home, but it's weird. It's really strange.
Kat, was post graduation an odd time for you as well in terms of getting jump started with your work and finding a direction?
Yeah, it's absolutely weird because you're basically thrown into a completely new environment and told to swim when you're not sure how to swim. And I think, yeah, most of my experience has been very, very strange. Like, I went into an internship right after school because I happened to have that planned out. But definitely after that period, I thought, I don't know what to do with my life. Yeah. And I think everyone who's post grad, no matter if your discipline is art or anything else, will find that being thrown into a completely new environment is going to rattle you. And that is okay. People are going to be there to help you too.
That's basically what happened. I mean, I was working full time teaching kids at an after school program at a public school, and it was an exhausting job. I mean, I would come home and just collapse because I was hanging out with 150 kids pretty much all afternoon, and they were elementary age. They were ages 5 to 11, and I was really, really struggling because I could not figure out how to be an artist outside of the structure of art school. Because yeah, art school is a ton of work and you're balancing a lot of things, but you don't have to worry about if you're going to make work. You're definitely going to make work in art school. I wasn't even making work. I was coming home collapsing and making 1,000 excuses for why I did not have time or money to make work. And so this was actually the very first bona fide cohesive body of work I made after post-graduation.
We have this question for Clara and says, what were you thinking with these images?
I have a dark side. I admit it. You know what it is? I've always been obsessed with the human figure. And it was a way for me to explore figures that were misshapen, but to think about it from a structural point of view. And eventually I did later on do a bunch of figure paintings that were these twisted, grotesque figures. But what I really liked about this is that it was all printmaking. So this is dry point, which is a non-acid process. And it was great. Like I had this baby press that you guys saw right here. And I was able to make these prints in my living room because I wasn't using any toxic materials. And so I felt like I was doing more than just sketching in my sketchbook because that just didn't seem as formal or as pronounced. And so when I look back at this work, I really don't like these prints. Like I look at them and I'm like, the whole artist statement behind these is look at how weird I am. I don't know, like there's nothing more to it. And so I cringe when I look at these prints. But this idea of how do I actually exist as a practicing artist outside of school, that's what I got from this series.
I just want to point out this funny comment by Lisa H saying, imagine this as a picture above a dentist chair. And I think actually it addresses something kind of interesting. And Clara, you might have already touched on this subject, but I was wondering where you saw these images living and what you wanted to do with it. But you also said that your artist statement was ultimately just you saying, look at how weird I am.
I honestly did not even go there. I was so behind in terms of professional development at the time. I honestly had no idea. I just wanted to make stuff. That's how behind I was. Like I wasn't even thinking, am I going to show this? Am I going to promote it? I just wanted to prove to myself that I could have a job and also make things at the same time. And this series, regardless of the fact that I don't like it, is proof of that. And so I'm still proud of that project, even though I don't like the images. And by the way, we do have this jelly plate printmaking tutorial if you guys want to nerd out with me on printmaking stuff. And Jordan, let's talk about this series of digital pieces. I believe this was senior year at RISD?
Yes, I was a senior. It was my very last semester, so it was the spring. And this is the section where we were talking about before the stream, like the cringy art, like which one is it? And this is the cringe where it all comes out. And when I was in art school, especially towards the middle, like sophomore or juniors and beginning of senior year, I struggled a lot because I hadn't really trained in what I wanted to do. You guys saw the fan art that we showed a couple minutes ago. That's what I really wanted to do. And I felt like by the time I was a senior, I hadn't really gotten better at that. I hadn't really explored that. And so I wanted to try doing some things that are more related to concept art and visual development. And so in my portfolio class, I decided to create a series of just environment paintings. I had never done it before. I had no idea what I was doing, and there are so many things I had yet to learn, even about the simple principles of light. Like there's just certain things I had no idea. So this was my attempt at, pushing out as much creativity as I could. And I don't like most of these images now, but I tried my best.
Well, Jordan, what makes you cringe about these? I'm just curious, because I look at them and I'm not cringing. Like, what is it that you don't like about them?
Well, as I've developed as an artist, I've learned how to tell stories a lot better. And I struggled with that. I struggled with storytelling, composition, and just painting in general has always been a challenge for me. And so, it's cringy to look at, like the quality, like compared to what I can do now. At the time, I would probably say I was biting off a little bit more than I could chew, because I was trying to teach myself all this and do like 6 or 7. Might have even been 8. I can't remember the final number of how many I did, but I was trying to teach myself all this stuff in a semester. So that's really tough to do.
We have a question from Raw Nuck. They're saying, do we make do with cheap art supplies, or do we invest even when we're struggling with finances? Because good art supplies can make it so much better. Kat, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely mix and match and experiment a little bit. I know for certain things you have to buy the good materials. For instance, I had a friend who wanted to go cheap for watercolor brushes, and she tried it and she was like, oh gosh, am I a bad artist? No, it was the brush that was actually pretty bad, spreading the ink. But for you might be surprised what you might consider cheap and good, because there are plenty of cheap materials that are also really good. For instance, you can just buy charcoal. Charcoal is a really good medium that's relatively inexpensive. And I think that my materials that I use, Bristol paper, black ink, and a quill pen, the quill pen lasts a very, very long time, for years and years and years. The only thing you would need to keep buying is the paper and the ink, and I don't think the expenses pile up that much. So there's also an art prof tutorial or stream, I can't remember which, where Prof Lieu finds different household materials to paint with. Clara, do you want to explain a little bit more about that video, because it's a little hazy in my head?
Yeah, that video is about household items. Anything that's an average house might have. For example, toothpaste or coffee or, I don't know, mustard, different things that you would normally not think about as art supplies, but really transforming them into something. Because while it is really nice to have that really good quality oil painting and everything, it does challenge you when you have a material that's not inherently nice. There are certain things that just look nice no matter what you do. Oil paint will always be beautiful. Like you really cannot make that material look worse. I mean, you can paint badly with it, but the oil paint will still look really nice on its own. And so there's definitely an argument for not using expensive supplies all the time. On the other hand, nice gouache is really worth it if you guys can afford it. And by the way, this is a stream that Jordan and I did about mood boards for character design. And so those of you guys who were asking earlier about how to get started with a project, this is a really good stream for that. Jordan, can you just give a quick summary of this one?
Yeah, so I talk about my personal project, and I show how I create the character designs by getting different inspirations. So even what you're seeing here, those 6 shots are for a specific character, and I said I want it to kind of glow like this, and I wanted to have this kind of appearance. And so when I combine all those things, it's able to help me create a final design. And you could do it for environments, props, vehicles, whatever you want as well.
Cool. All right, Kat, let's move on to this next project. Tell us when you did this project.
I did this project my final year at art school, so kind of appropriate that I started off with that project I did freshman year, and I ended on this project that I did senior year. And many of you can probably tell the charcoal hands versus this ink comic style, they're very different artworks. And I think that just goes to show that I tried a lot of things in art school. I tried to find what works for me, and I think this works for me. But this is one of my favorite projects because I feel I was truest to myself as a storyteller in this story. It's called The Biggest Men in the World, and it's about the tallest men in the world being dumbfounded by how wonderful and huge the world is, but also how limited he is, even though he's hailed as like the biggest man in the world. And there's a prevalent theme of gratitude and wonder in this story. And I think those themes really interest me. And before, I wasn't really sure what kind of stories I wanted to tell. Sad stories, happy stories. I'm not sure what genre, but I sort of landed on this weird drama fiction genre that I really like exploring. And it opened the floodgates for me to open to tell other kinds of stories. I know, Jordan, you said earlier that as you aged as an artist, you became a better storyteller. And I was wondering if you had a similar experience where something just opened up the floodgates for you, or did you develop something over time that helped you become a better storyteller?
Well, part of it was studying different movies, different games, different things that I liked and really analyzing it. So for my project Shadowboxers, what I did was I analyzed all these things that I liked, and I was like, okay, why does this character resonate with me? Why does this story, leave such an impact? How are they raising the stakes throughout? And then I started writing my own stuff. And I think just, observing and then practicing it and doing that over and over again really helped me grow as a storyteller.
I just want to show this slide of Kat's technique, because I think if you guys go through and we revisit the comics, sometimes in digital format, it's easy to miss what that original inking was done. And I think a lot of people could say, oh, it was done in marker or it was done digitally, because you can't tell a lot of the time in a digital image. But I feel like this was a landmark for you, Kat, not just in terms of the story, but in terms of your choice of materials. Because that does happen in art school, where people are charcoal and oil paint and collage and everything left and right. I mean, what made you settle on the quill pen? It is not an easy tool to use. I mean, you make it look so easy in this character design tutorial, but how did you land on this technique?
Well, first of all, it is a professional standard to do comics in ink with a brush pen or a paintbrush or a quill pen. And that's what got me started in it. And after a while, I just realized that digitally drawing or doing a different medium like marker was completely different from ink. And I preferred ink for that line quality. Because when you do quill or you do paintbrush, you can really control the width and the thinness of the line, and it looks so much more natural and fluid. It's a lot harder to control that digitally or with a marker. A marker is just very standard one line, one width kind of deal.
Natalie has this question. Cal, I'll just leave this one for you. Can we talk about dealing with harsh inner criticism and perfectionism slowing productiveness to a crawl? So did you ever struggle with that as you were learning how to do this character design, working on some of your projects?
For sure. And I still struggle with it. I say that The Biggest Man in the World is my favorite project. It is one of my favorites, but I still have that critic in me going like, that art quality could have been better. And it's never going to go away. In fact, it might be a good thing I have that critic. It might be a bad thing. But I think one thing that you always have to keep in mind when making art and you have that harsh critic in your head is that finished is better than perfect. And you got to push through until the end. Ultimately, if you have a finished piece, that is going to be what matters. Whereas someone else who has a harsh critic within themselves and just makes them stop before finishing any project, I don't think you're going to be productive in that way. And actually, it was Clara who told me this advice: finished is better than perfect. And Clara, actually, where did you get this advice?
Actually, I'm so ashamed to say this, but I heard that it's a poster that they have at the Facebook corporate headquarters. It actually says on the wall, done is better than perfect. So there you go. We're being influenced by corporate America, Kat.
Could we?
But it's true. I mean, professionally, I would rather have something that's finished than something that's almost done, but amazing, right? Because ultimately, whether it's done matters more than the quality. You would hope that you would get both, but sometimes you have to do that. We have this question here from W315 for you, Kat, and they are saying, is quill pen the same as a dip pen?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I don't know the specifics to that. I'm going to guess, but don't take my word for it. I think quill pen and dip pen can be used interchangeably, but specifically for dip pen, it could just be a nib attached to a handle that you have to physically dip in the ink to get the ink to draw. But a quill pen can also be the same nib on a pen, but it has like a refillable ink cartridge within. So you don't have to dip it into an ink cartridge because the cartridge is in the handle. And so you can just draw without having to pause to. But I mostly have experience in dip pens. Quill pens, I can't trust. I don't know. I'm just scared it'll burst open in my bag or something, and I can just trust when ink is in a little bottle rather than in the handle.
Well, you guys, if you want to see spectacular inking technique, watch this character design tutorial, because actually Kat has a lot of really smart, very simple tricks that I never had seen before. So watch the tutorial if you guys have an opportunity. All right. My project, the second one I'm going to bring up, was actually my MFA thesis project, which is basically the final project you do in the final year of your master's degree. And I felt a lot of pressure for this because it's your master's degree. It's your final project. I mean, Jordan, you just went through this. You just finished your master's. You had this year-long project. How does that feel when you know that project is on the horizon?
You know, this kind of goes back to what we were saying in the beginning about how do you know like a project is exciting or one of your favorites. And I enjoyed the process so much that I put more pressure on myself than I feel like the institution did in a way. Not to say that they weren't telling me do this, but I had such high expectations for my own self, and I wanted to build all this stuff, and I ended up accomplishing more than I set out to do when I originally pitched it. But it still is a lot to take on.
Yeah, I mean, I had this project looming. Like, it was the summer, and I was thinking all summer, oh, you're going to start your thesis in September. And you do exert a lot of pressure on yourself to make it good because it's your finale for your master's degree. And I really struggled in graduate school. It wasn't really the best fit for me. And I elected to be a sculpture major because I decided that if I was going to bother going back to get a degree, that I wanted to learn something I was not very good at. Now, that said, that's really hard because I was surrounded by a lot of people who did their undergrad degree in sculpture and who really knew what they were doing, and I did not.
Raphael's asking this question: is there any interesting way to find a theme or a concept? So, Clara, I'll leave that one for you since you're showing your work, and maybe you can talk about how you came up with the theme for this one.
Yeah, this project gave me such a headache because I was thinking back actually to the skull prints, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, I hate that work so much. Please don't do anything like that ever again. I wanted to do something that felt personal and important to me, but also people could relate to, because I didn't feel that the skulls were very relatable. And so I spent all summer, I couldn't come up with anything. And then eventually I thought, I'm so mad at myself, I can't do this. And then I realized, you know what, let's do a project about the process I just went through. Knowing I had to do this project, not knowing what I wanted it to be, knowing I wanted it so bad, but I didn't know where to find it. And so because I knew I wanted to work with the human figure, I thought to myself, what is a motion, a physical motion a figure could do to show that search, trying to find something? And so eventually I landed on digging, because when you dig for something, you don't always know what you're going to find or if you're going to get the thing that you're looking for. And so I created this sculpture installation that basically are these figures that are digging into their shells, because the rubble you guys are looking at here, this is actually the molds that I used to make the figures. So they're literally digging into the shells that they emerged from. I'm very proud of this. I know it sounds a little bit egotistical, but I have such an inferiority complex about sculpture that I was very pleased about this.
And Natalie thinks it's a stunning sculpture, by the way.
I think
Thank you.
Is it like a stunning sculpture? But speaking of where to get ideas and where to get themes from, this digging series later transformed into a waiting series that you did, Clara. Am I correct?
Well, one thing led to another. I don't have the slide here, but I had a monotype that was of people digging, and I did a whole series of those. And the last one I did wasn't the diggers. It was actually people watching the diggers. So the diggers weren't visible. And so I actually got really interested in the people that were watching. And I thought, oh, they're waiting for something. And so I ended up doing a project about people waiting for things. And so it's so amazing how one project leads to another. Like, Kat, after you did The Biggest Man, didn't you do the Mama Bruja project?
Right. I think, yeah, as you said, one thing led to another. And a big theme in Biggest Man in the World was just wonder and the unknown, something out there you don't quite understand. And that kind of naturally led into Mama Bruja, where a big theme of it is religion and the unknown. And so things tend to relate to one another. And I think to answer that user's question about how to find different themes and ideas, you might be surprised how things will just sort of tumble together like dominoes in a row, but also just finding something you're genuinely passionate about. I think I'm genuinely passionate about the unknown. I mean, who wouldn't be? It's so weird and cool. I want to know, right? Just finding something to explore.
Or really scary. A lot of people find the unknown really terrifying. But see, that's why it's interesting that that is your point of view on the unknown. And that's what you're communicating through your comics, which is really, really cool. We have a comment here from GSD. Clara, don't you find when you look back at all your work still has an undertone of weird or creepy? Yep, that's who I am. I have never been somebody to deny that at all. And I'll tell you, I got a lot of pushback for this project. It was not well received by the committee. I got a lot of accusations that I was trying to make work about the Holocaust, and nobody seemed to care about the whole reference to the figures digging into their own shells. And I was like really sad about that because that was the part of the project I was the most proud of, I suppose. I don't know, Jordan, did that ever happen to you in school? Were you like, really? You guys didn't appreciate that one part I'm so happy about?
Oh, that happens all the time. I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I can tell you how I feel whenever that happens. It's always really crushing because a lot of times I'll base the concept off of the one thing that they don't like at all. And I'll stand on it or I'll think about it for hours, not sleep, which happened many times, which I'm not super proud of, but it happens. And it's just part of the process. And I think that's part of just what it means to endure a serious critique is being able and willing to accept feedback that you don't want to hear and actually pricks at the parts that you really appreciate about something you worked on.
And Kat, I know you had a similar experience with those 50 hand drawings that you weren't connecting to the teacher very much and they weren't really noticing your progress. Was that the case?
Yeah, I felt that was the case. This is so sad, but I was like, I just want them to say something nice about my work. Just one nice thing. But instead, I just got a lot of these really vague feedbacks. And some of them were very clearly, don't do this. That's bad. And I was like, okay, good. Now I know. But others are like, feel the atmosphere. Like, feel the paper. And I was like, I don't know what to do. How do you want me to touch the paper? But I mean, upon reflection, after having done the series, I think the most important takeaway from doing this project is that I just need to keep drawing. The more I draw, the better I'll get. And the more likely I will have to have a few pieces that are good. And the other bad pieces, we don't have to show them. So that was my biggest takeaway for that. But I think enduring enduring a really harsh critique is important. You have to feel that. Sometimes I meet someone and I think they've never been ripped apart in a critique before, and it shows. And it's just good life experience. Like, how do you deal with that situation?
I also think that you have to, as an artist, start with yourself, because you can't rely on other people to appreciate or validate you. You have to believe in that project to begin with. Jordan, you just came off that huge project, and I'm sure you had to believe in that 1,000%, because if you're not into the work, there's no chance your audience is going to be into it. You're the biggest fan of your own work. Ultimately, it has to be that way. And I think that's what a lot of these projects have taught us, is that we can't wait for the professor to dote on us all the time, because we're not always going to get that. I mean, Jordan, did you get that with shadow boxers, where sometimes people just didn't react as much?
There were times where in the early stages of my designs, people would be like, it's whatever. But the story or the idea of it was really cool. But for whatever reason, I couldn't indicate how cool it was in the design itself. And I struggled through that process because that lasted for several months. But you're totally right. I had to be the biggest fan of my own project because that's what pushed me forward to go like, you know what? I don't care what they say. I'm going to make this even cooler. I'm going to make this even better. And in a couple of weeks or months, when they see the final product, they're not even going to be able to recognize it. It's just going to blow their socks off. And people can call that arrogance if they want to, or, you know, maybe being overconfident. But I think for me, it was necessary as I was building something that I was super excited about.
Absolutely. Art Prof has a podcast, which is available on Spotify, also on iTunes. We would love it if you guys would leave us a rating and a review. Please join us on Discord. Jordan, me, and Kat will be in the post live streams channel to chat more with you guys. We got some great comments that we didn't get to, so hopefully we can talk about those in the Discord. The invite link is in the video description below. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and join the Art Prof family. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters who make everything possible. Thank you to everybody for your thoughtful comments, for contributing to the conversation. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.